potentially could return to the matchday squad on Monday night. Of course, those additional recovery days will help. I certainly wouldn't expect Mikel Arteta to include either of those in the starting 11. I think it's going to be a case of Zinchenko, maybe minutes from the bench, integrating him very slowly. We know he's had ongoing problems with that calf now for several months. So that's something that does need to be managed very carefully. And Kivo has done a fairly decent job. And like I say, you look at those 6 wins on the bounce, and they're certainly not going to be making wholesale changes, with the fact that Arsenal have only been playing 1 game per week.
I do want to bring it back to the Bournemouth injury news, because a lot of people were asking as well in your Athletic Q&A. So with that, would you consider transfer him out of your team? Would you even play him this week in the off chance that he might start? Because like we kind of said, he's been so important for Bournemouth this season that would they risk him?
It depends on how much this coming together with Mateo Kovacic has affected that existing knee problem. Again, I suspect that it's being managed. It's something that may need to be addressed in the summer, and they'll sort of patch him up to get him through. Now, for me, Solanke, if he's included in the matchday squad, he starts. It doesn't really make any sense to keep him on the bench and then introduce him. It's one of those ones. It's not like a muscle injury as such, where you're taking that risk and that chance of maybe really exacerbating that problem and potentially ending a player's campaign. It's knee related. He did come through and he did play 90 minutes against Manchester City in the cut and thrust of the game when the adrenaline's pumping. That's nothing new, and how those injuries can evolve 24 to 48 hours later. I am a Solanke owner. I will be leaving him in my squad, and most importantly, I will be leaving him in the starting 11. But as always, ensure that you do have a little bit of depth to your bench. The thing is, up until now, he hasn't trained. So this is what we do know. He hasn't trained with the squad. So he's went a full week off. He's a high-profile, high-status player with the Cherries under a little bit of pressure. They went on that little, was it an 8-match unbeaten run? They haven't quite hit those dizzy heights again. So Areola will want, he needs his best players to perform. He has one more session and a decision will be made after that. So that's the difficulty that we're in at the moment. They still have a session on the Saturday to come through. So I'm prepared to take the risk and the gamble, and if he doesn't make it, well, I'm going to have somebody coming in from the bench.
We've got quite a few messages here. We got CMC Wookie. He says hello to us. Geo Boys wants to know about Estupinian. We will get there. Roberto says hey. Juan also says hey. And Jandre is welcoming us back as well. And Marius is just messaging too. But we're going to go back to Arsenal here just very quickly, finish off with them. Thomas Partey, he's been back in training, if I'm correct there, Ben. Why hasn't he made it into your starting 11? Is it a little bit too soon for him to get those minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. We've only had a handful of sessions with the group. So great, fantastic that he is nearing a return to competitive play. But again, you've got to give context in and around that. We're talking about a player who has suffered several setbacks. And you're also looking at that Arsenal team. Even when fully fit, who are you taking out of that Arsenal midfield? He's certainly not, disrupting, player of the year, Declan Rice in that holding role. Ødegaard arguably is hitting that purple patch of form, and Kai Havertz, as I have him there, or certainly I think he'll maybe feel a little bit aggrieved. He could potentially, stay up front with Gabriel Jesus, and then you've got the likes of Emile Smith-Rowe who could come in on that left-hand side. So Mikel Arteta's got options. The sensible decision will be that careful integration, maybe, a 10 or 15-minute run out, gradually build that up, and then hopefully, we'll see a really strong, finish to the season for Thomas Partey. But the difficulty is going to be, when everybody's fully fit, is trying to force his way back into that starting 11.
Marius has asked with Solanke, he wants him as his triple captain for game week 28. Do you think he'll be all right by then?
Let's try and get game week 27 out of the way first. Like I say, if you missed it at the head of the show, this is nothing new. This is an issue that probably dates back to the game against Tottenham Hotspur. So it is something that's been managed. Um, what I would say, because it is Dominic Solanke, you know, they will be looking to do everything to expedite a potential return. They will be, pulling out all the stops to ensure that he is fit, or certainly maybe he's not 100% fit, but involved and playing in that Cherries team.
Okay, let's move our attention to Aston Villa now. And they seem to have done all right with this kind of makeshift team because they've been battered by injuries, especially in defence. It looks like Pau Torres will be making it into the 11 this weekend. But are there any other updates that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, the other big, I suppose, defensive boost for Unai Emery is the return of Ezri Konsa. He has trained with the squad all week. He spent around about a month on the sidelines again with his own knee problem. That was MCL. So again, nothing too serious. But of course, a month on the sidelines, he will lack that little bit of sharpness and match fitness. And while Emery said that, certainly Pau Torres and Konsa will be included in the matchday squad, he was non-committal when asked if they would be ready to start. I would suggest that Torres is obviously better placed. We know he's had ongoing ankle problems. Last weekend was more of a precautionary withdrawal. Said he had pain down the back of his legs, suggests a little bit of maybe muscular issue, possibly even fatigue related just due to his lack of minutes. But he's been cleared. So, like I say, we expect him, Torres, to line up in that back four. Other considerations around this team could be at left back with Luca Digne maybe vying for that spot with Moreno, but for this week, I'm plumbing for Moreno still.
And also just kind of looking at the FF Hub lineup that we've got here, Tielemans is up front. Is that kind of like a support striker role?
Yeah, it's more of a hybrid role, I would say. We have seen Watkins as that lone striker, so it would ultimately be a 4-4-1-1, or Tielemans, in and around the opportunity to sit in behind or go and float up there with Watkins. But yes, certainly not as an out and out striker as such as we would see with Ollie Watkins. More that player to link up the play, get in those little pockets of space, and we know how clever Youri Tielemans can be when he's on his game.
But do you think that maybe adds to the appeal of Tielemans? Do you think that he could be a differential FPL option because he'll be in and about the box, sniffing around that area, the danger area, and we do know that he likes a pop outside of the box as well.
Yeah, he's very patchy, isn't he, Tielemans? Didn't have a great start of the season. He's a player that I liked at Leicester. Arrived at Aston Villa and didn't quite, probably get off to the start that he wanted. He's slowly grown into that role and grown into that Villa team, and I think he's becoming more of an important player within that Villa squad. Is he a player that I'd like to take a punt on? I think there's probably others that I wouldn't certainly look to double up on any of the Villa midfield, but I would probably default to the likes of maybe Douglas Luiz at the moment. I'm not a big fan of Leon Bailey. I don't rate him very highly, in my opinion. Again, he's very hot and cold. Or even John McGinn, I think he's had a fantastic season as well. So I would certainly put Douglas Luiz and maybe McGinn ahead of a Tielemans.
So continuing over to the Bees, I guess there is big news in defence for them, but across the team as well. What are the updates, Ben?
Yeah, the big news is, unfortunately, and we did hear Thomas Frank at his press conference actually did reference some data that we put out yesterday with Sky Sports, talking about the number of injuries and the number of days lost. Newcastle, my boys, unfortunately, we are at the top of the table that nobody wants to be top of, but Brentford were actually second. And he did say that, when it comes to the number of key players, the number of first team players within his team, a high percentages of those are key personnel. And unfortunately, Ben Mee is another player now who, he's going to spend the rest of the season watching on from the sidelines. It was an ankle injury, initially referenced as a little bit of a sprain. Weren't sure if it was contact or not, but post-match evaluations and an X-ray unfortunately revealed that there's a fracture on that ankle. So that's going to end his campaign early.
That's a real shame for Ben Mee and also for Brentford too. But how's the rest of the squad looking?
Yeah, pretty much as you were. Again, we've got a couple of long-term injuries. The nearest of those to potentially returning Brian Mbeumo and maybe Ethan Pinnock, but that would be the other side of the international break, so maybe back end of March. The rest, we're certainly looking into April, and the likes of sort of Rico Henry and Josh Da Silva, again, they won't be back until 2024 to 25.
So continuing over to Brighton, and what is the latest with them? Because there seems to be some positives coming out of their camp.
Yes, generally speaking, quite positive. There's potentially, a couple of places up for grabs here. So there may be tweaks to this starting lineup. We'll start with the good news first. We had the likes of Tariq Lamptey, Joel Veltman, Evan Ferguson all miss out midweek in the FA Cup down at Molineux. Thankfully, those players have been past fit. How fit remains to be seen. We know De Zerbi is very coy with regards to giving us too much information on those players, but they will be in and around the matchday squad. I would suggest that he can't really afford to omit all of those from the starting 11, given their current state of play with regards to injuries. Danny Welbeck has had his minutes managed. So he's the one that we could look at with maybe Evan Ferguson or Welbeck. I'll have a think on that. He also referenced two players, Simon Adringa. He said that he last time out, he wasn't particularly good. That wasn't through the lack of effort or quality, merely the fact that he's played a lot of minutes, post Africa Cup of Nations. So he's a little bit fatigued. So maybe we could be looking at the likes of maybe Ensisco to come in to that team. Although again, he probably isn't 100% in terms of his sharpness following surgery on his knee. And also question marks over, well, he said that Lewis Dunk could not play 3 games in a week. So, it remains to be seen whether Lewis Dunk does indeed start or not. It could be Adam Webster that comes into that team. We have Baliba coming to midfield with Billy Gilmore, serving the second game of a 3-match ban following his dismissal last weekend.
So with the Brighton situation, Gio Boys was extremely excited, wondering about Estupinian. He says, hold or sell. Would you put your faith in the winger because... the wing back, because it seems like he's going to be kind of a little bit unleashed, especially with the kind of injury news that you've been talking about with the team there. They need that width. Will it come from the wing back?
I think the difficulty that we have, he has slipped down the pecking order. He had those back-to-back hamstring injuries, which really hampered him somewhat. He was flying, then he came back in. I think he was introduced from the bench and he scored that screamer. And everybody thought, everybody jumped back on to Esputina thinking, right, well, he's here to stay. And De Zerbi, whether it was through a lack of form or whether it was just a change in ideologies or philosophies or, he hasn't really maybe had the number of minutes that FPL owners would have liked. But yeah, look, given the current situation, I think, Espininen, oh bollocks, Purvis.
Purvis.
That was me Paul Merson moment there.
Yeah.
You know what it is? I've nailed his name for weeks in a row, and then it's just all went down the toilet there.
I thought, have you had a beer or two before we've come on? Is that the problem?
I think I probably should. That's the problem. Sober.
Yeah. Marius says Estupinian is a troll, as is Digne. So he's saying avoid him. One team that a lot of people aren't invested in and avoid a lot because they're not very good is Burnley. But we still have to go through their names. So who is going to be named in the starting 11?
Josh Brownhill, he was dismissed last weekend, so that's a 3-match ban. We have Josh Cullen probably coming in. We don't see too many changes typically from Vincent Kompany. So maybe just a like-for-like swap. Charlie Taylor at left back, he returned from a chronic shoulder problem. Otherwise, like I said, I don't really see too many changes in that Claret squad.
So continuing over to who is coming up next, Chelsea. And again, negative news this game week. Mauricio Pochettino confirming some injuries. But Ben, let's talk through them.
Yeah, the big one, I suppose, and we knew that there was an issue midweek, which was Christopher Nkunku. That's a hamstring problem. we're hoping it only keeps him out until after the international break, so maybe around about 3 to 4 weeks. Devastating, given the fact that he only recently returned from that knee problem. How will Mauricio Pochettino line up? Well, we did see the likes of Levi Colwell dropped in the FA Cup, so he should come back in. Ben Chilwell on the left-hand side. Will Mudryk be rewarded for his goal? I seem to think so. It's between him and Raheem Sterling, you would think. With the rest of the team, probably more or less, picking itself. The only other discussion point will be whether it's Sanchez or Petrovic in goal.
But with Silverback, is he going to be going straight back into the team, or is it age / the injury?
Um, it's a tough one. Certainly hasn't got a lot of training time under his belt since that groin problem. It was a little bit more severe than first thought. Initially we were only looking at maybe a 3 to 4 day potential period, certainly looking to return in the Carabao Cup final. That didn't happen, and again missed out midweek. So just for that, just through a lack of time on the training pitches, and the fact that Caldwell was able to be rested in that fifth round tie, that has me leaning towards him rather than Silva. And do you know what? Like I say, once you have everybody back and fully fit, I think Silva may struggle to force his way into that Chelsea lineup now. I think, he could be a player that does leave Stamford Bridge in the summer.
Oh, big call there. Eric G has says Mudryk might be out with strained tear ducts. In reference to his reactions after Chelsea losing the Carabao Cup final. There was some interesting videos with him, and also Fernandez as well had some good reactions. But we're going to move on to Crystal Palace, and they've had a fantastic reaction to the new manager Bounce. They had a great game week last week against Burnley. We'll see if they can continue it, but they tried a new style. But the big question is Eze going to be fit enough to start this week?
No, would be the short of it, Jason. In my opinion, we did see traces of Oliver Glasnich's input at Goodison Park for Crystal Palace, where he watched the game from the stands. We've seen that 3-4-3 sort of style implemented. Palace playing a lot more on the front foot, a lot more attacking. Played really well and carried that over. Look, let's put it into context. They only did play Burnley, and you would expect 3 points, but it was a good 3-0 confidence boosting win. And yes, so the likes of Will Hughes and Eberechi Eze have both trained fully, as they had a couple of sessions, in fact, before that Burnley game. For me, both of those players will be named on the bench. Joachim Anderson was a player who went off around about the 90th minute last week. That was fatigue related, just a little bit of cramp. Again, suggesting probably it's just this new style of play, different demands on the player, at different intensities, a lot more ground to cover. So players will take a little bit to adapt to this style, but Anderson has been past fit and he's absolutely fine.
But because of this new style, do you not see that there might be some rotation because of the players getting used to it? Or do you think that Glasner's kind of thinking, right, going to start the same 11 because we played so well last week and they understood the instructions?
If we were looking at teams who are playing 2 and 3 games a week, then yeah, look, it's definitely a case of load management, and you want to ensure that you're keeping your players fit and healthy and performing at optimum levels. When you're playing, once every 7 days or what have you, 6, 7, 8 days, then it isn't an issue for these guys. And like I say, coming off the back of that 3-0 win, I think that starting 11 deserves to remain in place.
Well, we'll continue over then to Everton, and at the moment, kind of every game is so important for them. But is the injury news positive coming into game week 27?
Yes and no. There are a couple of question marks with regards to Idrissa Gana Gueye. He was forced off last weekend with an adductor issue, a slight tightness there. So the decision's going to be made after today's session. And also Amadou Onana. Now, he's a player that I would have started, but it is just this niggling groin problem. That means that I think Sean Dyche will err on the side of caution. We have seen the return of Doucouré from his hamstring problem, so he's backing there, and that then sort of creates a little bit of a selection headache for that Toffees midfield. We have seen Sean Dyche default to the likes of Ashley Young for the majority of the season at right back or right midfield, with the likes of Seamus Coleman out, and Patterson potentially missing out, and even Harrison dropping to the bench for Ashley Young. But looking at the medium and long term, I think Ashley Young will be more of a squad player. I think if I'm right, I think he's 38 years of age now. So you want to be looking at the likes of the Harrisons in this world. And if Guy does miss out, and like I say, that's a latest test, then potentially, Ashley Young is a player that could come in, and there would be a slight reshuffle in terms of how those players are set up.
I heard that Ashley Young is actually slightly older than you.
I hope not, Jason. I mean, if he is and he's playing at that level, he's doing very, very, very well.
It's more in reference of how young you are at
Do you think it's Benjamin Dinnery, not Benjamin Button?
Yeah. But yeah, just continuing over, there was a good discussion as well in the press conference from Sean Dyche about the lack of goals from the team. Obviously, Doucouré's back, Calvert-Lewin's in there as well. But yeah, what do you think are maybe the reasons behind that? Is it because Calvert-Lewin, he's still finding his feet after that injury? Do you think it's a bit of a lack of match sharpness from him, because he's underperforming his XG, which is quite rare for him? He usually is a very good goal scorer.
Yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate. Like I say, I think we all sort of hope that Calvert-Lewin can return and start putting in the performances and getting the goals that he did under Carlo Ancelotti. And then he had that stop-start sort of couple of years, and like I say, I go back to it. I mentioned this several times before. I think Sean Dyche has managed Calvert-Lewin really, really well in terms of getting him fit and ensuring that he stays fit. I think he lacks a little bit of confidence. There are occasions, Calvert-Lewin in full flow would have, could have maybe scored 3, 4, maybe 5 goals over that period with good gilt edge opportunities. So there's a confidence issue there. That little bit of pressure, that mountain. But, there'll come a time where he grabs a goal and it's coming off his backside, or it comes off his shoulder or an arm. He gets a little bit of luck. And then hopefully, once that happens, he gets some momentum and he hits the groove again, and he gets back on that goal trail.
Diego's asked a question about Spurs. We're going to get onto them, but we go through everything alphabetically. And obviously next up is Fulham. So what is the latest for them in a game? Who's it against this weekend? I forget who it is. You're going to have to remind me, Ben.
It's at home to Brighton, Jason.
There you go. So it's quite a big game because they're quite near each other in the table as well. But is there any positive or negative news in terms of their injuries?
Well, Marco Silva only listed Raul Jimenez as the only player missing through injury. So that would suggest that Willian and Harrison Reed, who was a precautionary head injury last year, withdrawal, suggests that they're both fine. Of course, he went to Old Trafford. Marco Silva actually made 6 changes for that game, but Fulham still went down to Old Trafford. And yes, it was Alex Iwobi who got a late goal, I think it was in time added on, but it was nothing more than Fulham deserved. They dominated really for large portions of that game. So I don't expect big changes. I have included Adama Traore on the right-hand side following his impact from the bench at Old Trafford. On reflection, I think maybe it's a little bit too soon for him. So that would be a player that I may look to change. Harry Wilson would be the player that could come in on that right-hand side. Doucouré Reed is another one, and even a swap over with Alex Iwobi. And the other position, is that holding role. Would it be? I've got Tom Kenny in there, but Harrison Reed could be the other one, while João Paulina is suspended.
Yes, he's back next game week, is that right?
Yeah, 10 yellow cards, 10 cautions, 2-match ban, so he is back for game week 28.
Now, Liverpool in game week 27, there's a lot of questions who will be back and who will be not. So, Ben, it's off to you. There's quite a few players with question marks over them that you got to answer about.
So there's, again, I'm probably going to make a couple of changes to this lineup. Of course, we had a glut of press conferences, as we always do on a Friday. And what we do know is Darwin Núñez and Dominic Szoboszlai have both trained. They've been with the group since Thursday, so barring any kind of reaction, those players will be fit and available. We're also expecting, or did expect, Andy Robertson and Wataru Endo to train with the squad on Friday afternoon. Robertson missed out in the FA Cup due to illness, whereas Endo picked up that ankle problem in the Carabao Cup final. So they're the difficult ones. I am saying yes with Robertson, just in, the fact that it was just a little bit of illness. If he was to miss out, then Tsimikas would probably be in there, although Joe Gomez is an option. I'm probably going to stick Darwin Núñez in here, which would mean Gakpo dropping to that left-hand side of midfield and Bobby Clark being the player that would miss out. Elsewhere within the group, Alexi McAllister has also been struggling with a little bit of illness. Klopp was hopeful that it hasn't spread through the camp. He's absolutely fine, so that's why he starts.
Interesting lineup then for Liverpool in game week 27. There's quite a few issues for them. Let's move over to Luton though, and what's the latest for the Hatters?
Again, this is an ever-growing injury list. And we talk about injuries to Manchester City and the Liverpools, but they have the strength and the depth within those squads. Luton don't really have, they're not fortunate enough to be able to call on, the masses deep down into their team. We've seen also was restricted to a place on the bench midweek after feeling some muscular discomfort while warming up. Amari Bell was forced off with a hamstring issue. In an ideal world, Amari Bell, I don't think would start. But it could be one where Rob Edwards say, could you go out there and do a job for me, particularly as Joe Johnson, the young 18-year-old who did come in for Bell midweek, has been struggling with illness. So maybe I'm seeing Bell start and then Joe Johnson coming in to replace him. Arsenal loanee Sammy Lokonga, he's been ruled out, so Mpanzu comes in. We may also see Andros Townsend in and around this team as well. Potentially, you could go with Morris up front, Woodrow dropping out, and then Townsend on that right-hand side.
So let's continue over to Manchester City, and it seems pretty consistent with the team at the moment, apart from Jack Grealish and the issues with him. But yeah, what is the latest for the team?
Yeah, Pep was quite coy, as he always is, so there was no update on Guardiola. What we do know ahead of the FA Cup midweek, that he was training almost pain-free, so there or thereabouts. Would I expect him to come straight back into the team? Probably not. Manuel Akanji, still yet to reach his sort of pre-injury levels, but working very hard. Jack Grealish, unlikely to return before the international break, so we're looking at around about 3 to 4 weeks with that recurrence of that adductor issue. Everybody else within that team should more or less sort of pick itself. There are slight tactical tweaks. We've seen 4-2-3-1. We've seen almost that 3-2-2-2. There's different variations, but in terms of personnel, hopefully I'm not too far off the mark with this.
Now, a lot of questions have just come flooding in. Where's Kevin De Bruyne?
Yeah, it's just a case of managing Kevin De Bruyne. I hate leaving De Bruyne out the starting 11, given the fact that, he's such an integral part of the team. But we know he got his start midweek. Prior to that, we had two appearances, or certainly he was named on the bench for those two games leading up to that. It's just about managing De Bruyne and making sure that, he did feel a little bit of discomfort. Pep was keen to say that it wasn't an injury ahead of last weekend's game. It was just more of a sensation and an awareness. So that was me thinking with maybe not starting two games and, within the week at this stage of his recovery, building up those minutes. There's still a long way to go with a lot of big, important games. I just think, Manchester City can afford to maybe although it is the Manchester derby, I'm trying not to let the gravity of the fixture cloud my judgment. Um, but again, it might be that you would put De Bruyne in instead of maybe a Kovacic, or maybe you could even change things around a little bit and bring Doku out and put De Bruyne in there.
Interesting.
Watch this space. That's not 100% locked in, no.
Yes, yeah. And so let's go over to the Manchester United team that will be facing Manchester City in that derby. Is there any positives? Because it just seems a team ravaged by injuries at the moment.
Yeah, in terms of how Eric Ten Hag expects his squad, probably more or less the same as we had midweek. The only player that really we thought maybe he's pushing for a return would be Harry Maguire. That doesn't look to be the case, which would mean Victor Lindelof sits alongside Rafael Varane, and Amrabat was a player who deputised. Supposed to be in that left back role, but again, it was more of a hybrid position where we've seen him sort of float into those midfield areas on occasions at the City ground.
Yes, it's a tough time there for Manchester United in terms of even up top. They've lost Højlund as well. And so I guess injuries coupled with their lack of quality, it means probably it will be an easy result for Manchester City. But you'll be hoping that Newcastle can bounce back from last weekend. But what is the team news for the Magpies?
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't get much worse in terms of the performance last weekend. We weren't great down at Ewood Park, and I think on another day, without Martin Dubravka, I think we could have easily have went out in the FA Cup. Sven Botman was rested against Blackburn. That was merely as a precautionary measure. He hasn't looked great. He certainly hasn't hit those levels pre that knee injury. And even though Eddie Howe was talking about, amongst many things, playing the piano and his ability not to, and his non-singing voice, he did say that Botman would probably be in the squad. By probably be in the squad, I mean he absolutely starts 100% for me. The only other position, we've seen Livramento start at the Emirates, but I'm putting Dan Burn back in there.
Yeah, what's the deal with Dan Burn being picked over Livramento? I've heard a lot of fans kind of a bit desperate and annoyed at the situation. Dan Burn, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but he's come under a lot of flack. He seems to be maybe one of the weak elements in the defence, whereas Livramento has hardly put a foot wrong as a fairly young defender as well. He's done a good job. What is the kind of belief in Burn over Livramento?
Yeah, and listen, I'm a big Dan Burn fan. I think he's been one of our best signings. I think he's been fantastic. You know exactly what you're getting with Dan Burn, 100%. He'll fight for the cause. He does get found out. He's not a left back for me. When you put him up against out and out wingers with raw pace, he's going to struggle. Um, Eddie Howe has talked about why he includes him, and it's a lot more than just his performances. It's what he brings in the dressing room, his leadership qualities on the pitch. But for me, if you're going to do that, then I would have a 3-5-2 or a 5-3-2. I would have Burn a left of Botman and Shaw. I would push Trippier up a little bit, especially again when he went through that little spell where every mistake that he seemed to make was being punished. And Livramento was coming into the game. He was playing really well on limited minutes, and he wasn't getting his chance. So for me, like I say, I would have went a few weeks back and probably rested maybe a Miley, and maybe change things around with an Almiron and change that lineup. But Eddie Howe loves these 4-3-3. And like I say, I think you look at how we performed defensively last season. One of the best units in the Premier League throughout. So I think we're just, Eddie Howe's probably looking at that thinking, well, if it worked and it was so successful last year, then hopefully we can sort of recapture some of that form and hopefully go back to being as watertight as we were. But you know, I think there's only, in terms of XG conceded, is it only Brentford who have a worst record over the last maybe 6 or 7 games, which is disappointing, particularly when we has aspirations of maybe pushing for a European qualifying place.
Yes. So let's continue over to Nottingham Forest. We'll trot through them.
Oh, with Nuno, well, again, very coy. We heard from him on Thursday, which means that, there were still training sessions to go. What we do know, Willy Bolly and Ibrahim Sangara are two players who are approaching the end of their recovery and rehab. Both of those players picked up injuries in the African Cup of Nations, so maybe those players are pushing for return. Chris Wood as well, slightly ahead of schedule. Initial timeline was around about 6 to 8 weeks, but Nuno, whether it was a little bit of smoke and mirrors or whether it was true or not, said that Chris Wood is nearing a return. But as long as Tayo Wami stays fit, then, that central striking berth will belong to him.
Yes, indeed. Although I was surprised that Chris Wood is actually the top goal scorer this season, not a 1 year.
Well, that's probably thanks to that hat-trick against Newcastle.
Yeah, we'll forget about that. No mention of that, Ben. That's quite a traumatic event. Sheffield United, they'll be hoping to avoid a traumatic event against Arsenal. Some good news for the team there, but frankly, they'll probably be expecting a miracle if they're going to get anything against Arsenal. But yeah, talk us through the news, Ben.
Yeah, I am quite unlucky to leave Molineux without anything last weekend. Missed opportunities. Ryan Brewster it was good to see him back on the pitch. Of course, given his injury issues and then that recent suspension, it's going to take him a little bit of time to get back up to speed. Ben Berrett Diaz is a player who Chris Wilder has eulogised about since his arrival at the club. He's missed the last couple through a hamstring problem, so we're going to throw him straight back in. Has trained with the team. The other player, George Baldock, he's been out for a while. I don't see him coming into that 11. If he does, it would be Jayden Bogle who would probably make way. Given the performance of last weekend, then, like I say, minimal changes and maybe just that Berrett Diaz as the only change to the Blades lineup.
So continue over to Tottenham, and a lot of interest in their back line. Is Udogie going to play or not? But also the latest on Richarlison and who's going to be his replacement.
This worked out quite well, actually, for me, certainly in terms of looking at that starting lineup, because I was toying with who maybe comes in with Brennan Johnson or Kulusevski. With Richarlison out, initially, Ange Postecoglou said around about 2 to 3 weeks. Then later in the interview went to a 3 to 4 weeks. Suffice to say, we're probably looking after the international break. So again, late March, early April. And that means Heung-min Son will probably go central with Johnson coming on the left-hand side. I do have Ndougui Destiny Ndougui coming straight back into the team. He has been training with the squad, no issues there. Pedro Porro probably still around about maybe 7 to 10 days away from a return.
There you go. Lots of analysis there on the 11. We're just gonna get a question here from Marius, the Israeli winger. Is he back in training? I think that's Manor Solomon. Is that correct?
It is, yes. There was no mention from Ange Postecoglou, but he is nearing return. The issue that we've had there, we had a secondary setback, which did require the winger to go back under the knife to tidy 1 or 2 issues up. So that did delay things. And as you know, with long-term injuries, it is very difficult to pin down a specific return to play time frame. He's a player that has missed several months again, so it could be that be minutes behind closed doors, bounce games, development side before actually pushing for the first team. Special mention, Ryan Sessegnon, again, another hamstring problem for him. Surgery, going to end his season. And that's just the latest in the long line of setbacks. So we wish him well for the future and hopefully he can come back fighting fit.
We got a question from Giandre. He says, sell, Porro or keep on the bench. What do you think?
Listen, if you've kept him up until this point, he should be in and around the matchday squad for game week 28. It depends on what the rest of your team's looking at, how your bench is looking. If you don't have fires to fight elsewhere, then I could leave him in there. Like I say, one more game week. Once he's fully fit, does he come in for the likes of an Emerson Royale? Yeah, I would expect so.
I think I figured out Tottenham's purchasing plans as well. Everybody in the name has Son in their name. You've got Son, Johnson, Maddison, Emerson, then Richarlison's injured. Who next is going to come into the team?
Uh, he put me on the spot there, Jason.
Oh, sorry. I'm just thinking.
God, are you thinking out loud? Was that rhetorical?
Well, there's another Emerson at West Ham, isn't there?
Yep, there's a left back at West Ham.
So you could have Emerson on the left, Emerson on the right, more Sons in the team. Yeah, I think
You could have Edison goalkeeper.
Edison goalkeeper, Allison is back up to Ellison.
Any suggestions? Pop them in the comments box below.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Benson. Yeah, we've got
Burnley, Benson.
yeah. Keep them coming, everybody, and we can talk about the Tottenham 11. But West Ham up next. Jared Bowen, not Son. He did fantastic last week, but are the Hammers going to be improved by anybody returning to their team?
Generally speaking, the Hammers squad is relatively fit and healthy. Aaron Cresswell missed out on Monday night through just a slight minor issue with that calf stroke Achilles. He should be okay for a return to training. The only guaranteed, or I suppose confirmed absentee is Maxwell Cornet, but he rarely threatens a start. And off the back of that Jared Bowen hat-trick and that 4-2 win, I expect the Hammers to be unchanged, which would mean Mavropanos gets the nod over Nayev Agard.
And with West Ham as well, they have one of the best injury records, don't they, Ben? Have I understood that correctly?
Absolutely. And when people ask for the data, typically they want headline numbers, and there's always context in and around that. And certainly in terms of injury incidents, the number of time loss, absence, West Ham and Wolves are by far this season's lowest in terms of individual injuries on 13 players each. However, when you consider that West Ham are involved in European football and their exposure, the number of minutes played is far greater, then the West Ham injury record this season is nothing short of remarkable when we look at in terms of how many injuries we've seen. And to give you an idea across what have we played now, coming up to maybe 7 months of the season, you may or may not have seen it before, Jason, but would you like to hazard a guess of how much cumulatively time has been spent on the sideline by injured players across those first 7 months?
Oh, I wouldn't be able to hazard a guess, mate. You just have to inform us all.
44 and a half years.
Oh my God.
which is mind-blowing. And when you look at that West Ham record, West Ham players are probably in the region of around about 9 to 10 months.
That's incredible.
Cumulatively, which, like I say, when they're a team that's amongst they've played one of the highest number of games due to their involvement. So what a fantastic job. And that's not just down to, that's the backroom staff. That's not just physios and coaches and strength and conditions. It's the managers, it's the players themselves. And that's a continuation from last season as well, where West Ham did have the best or lowest incident rates per 1,000 minutes played in 2022 to 23.
So let's continue over to Wolves, and it's as you said, that they have a good record, but for this game week, there's a few big injuries that are going to really upset them. Let's talk about Hwang Hee-chan. You don't have him in the 11. Is he not going to start?
He's not going to be in the squad, Jason. Good news for us, Newcastle. Bad news for Wolves, who have a trip to Tyneside. Of course, they're already without Matthias Cunha, probably going to be after the international break. Hee-chan Wan complained of a hamstring issue midweek. We still don't know the full extent of that. He's still being evaluated. Suffice to say, he's out of this one. It doesn't look like it's going to be one of those ones that just disappears overnight. I have put Bellegarde in there as well. Did look bright. when he has played for Wolves. But again, Gary O'Neill, by his own admission, has spoken that Bellegarde does lack a little bit of sharpness and fitness and has been affected by a little bit of fatigue. So um, whether he's fit enough and ready to start remains to be seen. But I have Pedro Neto leading that Wolves attack with Bellegarde on the left and Sarabia playing in on the right-hand side.
Jandre has one final question for us. He says, based on data, expected minutes, taking everything into account, would you sell Kevin De Bruyne to Son this week or hold for another week?
As much as I absolutely love De Bruyne, and he is, I would put him up there as one of the best players ever to have graced the Premier League. He wouldn't be a player that I would be investing in at this point, given the outlay, the cost, and the fact that City have coped so well in his absence, and they have such depth in that squad where they're able to rest, rotate, and manage De Bruyne carefully. In addition to that, you're also looking at Heung-min Son playing in that advanced central role as a striker, which makes his appeal even greater. So I would prefer Son over De Bruyne this week, particularly as well in a Manchester derby. And yes, we're all expecting City to steamroller United. United have been crap. United have been crap for the majority of their last 5, 6, 7 games, and yet they've managed to eke out and scrape results. Yes, the Fulham game was, I suppose, a blip on their recent record. How bad were they against Nottingham Forest? They come away with a victory. Do you know what? It mightn't be as easy as everybody thinks for City. I do expect a win, but it could be quite a close, hard-fought contest. And like I say, so I am definitely leaning towards Heung-min Son over De Bruyne.
We've got Tamina in the comments there, one of my gym friends. Hey, Tammy, how are you doing? Shape's been called Tammy. Let's continue, though, with the rest of the show. In fact, we're coming to the end. So that's game week 27 covered. As always, everybody, please make sure to stay subscribed to the YouTube channel. Obviously, we're here on Instagram Live as well. So follow the Premier Injuries Instagram there. If you've missed out on your questions being answered, you can tweet me and Ben. We'll be keeping hot on the social media up until the game week 27 deadline. But as always, we're going to wish you the best of luck and the best of health for game week 27 and beyond. So see